Hey everybody, before we get started, just reminding this episode brought to our patrons like Adam DeHarp, Architect 10, Blacksmith G, Carlos, Dragon, Ferris, Jeremy Vasquez, Just the Fae, Jonathan Sandoval, Legendary Boss Hunter, Regent Raptor, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, Sharvar, Sean Pryor, some guy named Bob, 723, and Varian the Crow, and viewers like you. If you like what we do, want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon, get access to episodes early and lots of other goodies, and it really helps us out. Thank you for your support, everybody. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Let's Take FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. So it's time for another highly anticipated unit and a fan-favorite character, and you know that means I gotta do the whole speech. I once sought to forge the ultimate blade, not one that cuts through flesh, bone, or the living. I sought a blade that terminates enmity, a blade that severs bonds, severs certainty, severs karma. That is to say, to be free of one's fate. Uncountable years of toil to reach this place. Forging thousands of swords to create a barrow of blades. Many paths converge here. Enduring desires flow here. Unjust deaths gather here. My whole life has been for this single swing. The heart of the blade is here. And then on camera I cough a lot, because I had to read a big long block of text right at the start of the show before my voice is lubed up. But if that doesn't tell you what we're doing here, what will? That's right, it's time for another esteemed New Year's SSR Saber. They are Japanese themed, as seems to be the theme, but we'll see about that in a second, JP anyway. So as is usual for our Let's Talk FGO Wanted, we'll be talking about a character's real-life history and folklore, their lore and fate, their mechanics, and some other stuff, plus their rarity of raid-ups. See, I made it alliterative. So, without further ado, we're going to hammer this one out. But you know, Muramasa is a story character. That's also who we're talking about, in case you somehow clicked on this video without knowing the thumbnail or name. But he is a story character. There's some ongoing story stuff. There'll be some spoilers if you're not caught up on your Lost Belts a little bit. So, hey-ho. Alrighty, so the swordsmith known simply as Muramasa, sometimes Sengo Muramasa, was known to have lived sometime during the Muromachi period. He was said to be the founder of the Muramasa school of swordsmithing, and the earliest dated blades we have with the imprint of that school or family name comes from around 1501, all these in CE, by the way. Now, historians believe, based on the time periods and the stamps on blades, and some of the other hallmarks we'll talk about a little bit later, that the Muramasa school may have spanned as far as 3 generations. Some of the latest swords that bear the mark of the Muramasa school come from the Kanbun period, which was between 1661 and 1673. So the exact dates and periods for the different generations of the school are debated by scholars, but you will occasionally see in some of the research that I found along with this references to, Muramasa 1, 2, 3, Muramasa the First, etc. So there is broadly believed to have been probably 3 generations, but where those generations fall and what they were doing when is subject to debate because there's a lot of wiggle room in history. Now, there are a few myths and legends surrounding Muramasa I and his origins. He was seemingly born in Kuwana in the modern Mie province, but some claim his epithet of Sengo was supposed to be his birthplace, but there's nowhere near Kuwana that's called Sengo, so probably not that. In another version, Muramasa I's mother was a follower of Senju Kanon, aka Guanyin, and the name Sengo is a contraction of a phrase meaning child of Senju. So, options. And yes, you may be wondering, but isn't it Senji? We'll come back to that in a second. So, histories and anecdotes from the late Muromachi period claim that Muramasa was a student of Goro Nyudo Masamune, probably the most famous swordsmith in Japan, who produced many famous and artful works and is a very common name in pop culture. You have probably seen Masamune as many times as you have seen Muramasa, being, I assume, a huge weeb, like me. But given that Masamune, or at least that Masamune, lived around the year 1300, and most of the swords we believe to have been made by Muramasa I come from somewhere between the 1400s or 1600s, this is incredibly unlikely. But it plays into a lot of myths and legends we'll circle back around to later. There is also another theory that Muramasa was a student of Heianjo Nagayoshi, a swordsmith from Kyoto who is well known for his engravings, which stylistically matches some of the samples we have of Muramasa's work. I also have my own personal theory about the Masamune connection that we'll cycle back to in a little bit. But that's just me, reading and interpolating. Anyway, by all accounts, Muramasa and his school made some very fine katana. They had a very distinct tang shape and a distinct wave-like pattern to the steel. The hama and the ripple of the steel is very important, and the Muramasa-style edge is known for its very intricate wave-like pattern that is very symmetrical and shows extreme care and precision in the forging. Seriously, go look up. They literally call it the Muramasa type edge or Muramasa type ripple. It's very precise. Now, the fun thing is, his blades, or at least the Muramasa school blades, the style of his blades, were popular among the samurai of the Mikawa province, which was governed by the Tokugawa clan. So this means that indeed they were involved with some incidents with the family. They were still popular with the clan. They were associated with events that, FGO and other sources relate, was because they were so popular with the Mikawa samurai that there were a lot of Tokugawa carrying these blades. Tokugawa Ieyasu himself was said to have owned 2 Muramasa blades, one of which is still owned by the modern Owari Tokugawa family as an heirloom. So, they've still got one of these, at least. Now, I suspect that this era, this period, is probably where the attempt to mash up the time frame of Muramasa and Masamune come from. One of Masamune's most famous blades, called the Honjo Masamune, ended up in the possession of the Tokugawa family also, and was considered a symbol of the shogunate for a long time. By the way, the Honjo Masamune is a real-life-ass mystery. After the American occupation, we forced Japan to no longer produce edge katana for a little bit and asked swords to be turned over to police or other historical outlets. And so the actual, youngest descendant of the Tokugawa family at the time turned in the Masamune to a police station, and it was allegedly taken by a guy from the American, Foreign Assets Office with a very fake-sounding name, and it's just missing. We have no idea where it's gone on either end of the ocean. Look it up sometime. Fascinating. Anyway, moving on, more about Muramasa. In the 18th century, popular culture began to take a turn. Official Tokugawa shogunate histories and mythologies were being made now at this point, hundreds of years later, and started claiming that the blades were cursed and that Ieyasu had banned them. Obviously, again, patently false, because they still have one in the family. But it's definitely a thing that kind of got out there, and was probably compounded by other general cultural movements, the anecdotes formed about Masamune and Muramasa, comparing the 2 famous swordsmen. And there are a lot of tropes and stock stories being used about Muramasa blades being cursed in kabuki plays from this time period. That's actually the bed shot I'm using here is from a kabuki play. The idea that basically it became a stock plot hook, that, you got a Muramasa katana, it's cursed. It'll force you to kill someone if you draw it. You can't sheath it unless it tastes blood. You'll commit suicide with it. Woo! That kind of shit. You all know those kinds of common tropes. Now, one of the more famous legends of Muramasa and Masamune that I would like to relate to you, because that's one of the things we do on this show, it has a lot of different variations, but almost all of them basically boil down to, again, an obviously fictitious account, but it's part of the legendary oeuvre that shapes pop culture here. The short version is both of them make a sword. A lord is trying to figure out who's the better swordsmith. Both the lads make a sword, and they place it in a river or a waterfall or something. Flowing water is usually involved. Muramasa's sword is perfectly functional. It cuts everything which passes in front of the blade, but Masamune's sword is shown to be superior because it restrains its cut somehow. Perhaps both swords cut all the leaves that flow by it in the river, but Masamune's does not cut the innocent fish who swim up next to it, or they both cut the leaves, but then the Masamune's leaves reform behind it and Muramasa's do not. Either way, Masamune's blades are considered to be more divine, more restrained, more holy, and Muramasa's blades are considered to be evil or demonic for their indiscriminate nature. So, this is where we get here. Now, as a result of this cultural shift, it means by the time we get to the Bakumatsu period, Muramasa's swords are considered to be cursed and a bringer of bad karma to the Tokugawa clan, and thus many anti-Tokugawa operators attempted to acquire them, and they were even, wielded by enemy commanders against the Tokugawa in the Boshin War. So, even though there was no real connection here, pop culture got enough that, Muramasa's swords became a symbol of anti-Tokugawa sentiment. Also because of their popularity and them not having enough swords, this means there were a lot of forgeries made during this time period. So, kind of out there, getting some extra replications. Now, despite their long historical and cultural significance, only one Muramasa stamped blade is marked as a national treasure or work of great, cultural import in Japan. This one is known as the Myoho Muramasa, the Lotus Sutra Muramasa. The blade is stamped with the date of 10th of November, 1513, translated from the dating system that was used at the time, but, we can correlate. It has the signature of Muramasa and a mantra from the Lotus Sutra, as well as some additional artistic engravings. So thematically, you can see some interesting things going on here. For instance, the engraving involves a image of a sword being empowered by a big coily dragon, so there's some cool stuff going on there. Additionally, weapons made by one of Muramasa's disciples, Fujiwara Masazane, are considered very high quality and famous as well. Masazane made a spear, the Tombokiri, which is quite famous as well. So, while there are loads of like national treasure ranked Masamune blades we have, which is very interesting by the way, many of Masamune's swords would have been the Tsurugi type, but they were split and reforged as katana later, funnily enough. But again, while there are several extant Muramasa blades, only a couple of them are considered artistic enough to count. Well, one of them really, and then some of his disciples. All right, let's lay down the heavy faith beats and hammer this one home with that lore. So, Senji Muramasa, which is an alternate spelling of Sengo Muramasa, is a pseudo-servant, as his legend is not quite strong enough for him to be recorded as a heroic spirit normally. This kind of tracks again. While fairly famous, a lot of it is just straight-up, made-up pop culture stuff, and, you know, when even the Japanese government only recognizes, like, one of your swords, you're maybe not as famous as you could be. So to manifest as a servant, Muramasa uses the physical form of Emiya Shiro, protagonist of the original Fate Stay Night. If, by this point, after, over 5 years of our podcast about FGO, and, over 5 years of FGO in English, nearly 8 years of FGO in Japanese, and, 18 years of this franchise, you don't know that much about OG Shiro, I can point you to the fact that all 3 routes of the original Fate Stay Night have been adapted into animations and mangas and stuff. There is a spin-off known as Cooking with Emiya Family, which has a manga, an anime, and a cooking game. There are alternate timeline versions of Shiro which appear in the Prisma Ilia franchise. There's a lot of ways you can get your basic understanding here. Plus, there's a tweet where I quoted somebody else's banger summary of Fate Stay Night you can read. It's not mine, but it's a great summarization. But yes, so physically Muramasa appears as Shiro, and obviously there are some thematic links we'll talk about in a second, but he is still Muramasa's primary personality of crotchety old man. It is very funny, if I may say so myself. Now, there's a couple theories as to why Shiro is used as the base for Muramasa. One is simply compatible skills and temperament. Shiro is known for being, super driven, but also very self-deprecating, self-sacrificing, kind of meshes with Muramasa being really skilled, but also down on himself. And Shiro's magecraft is hyper-focused on his projection magic, as both his element and origin is sword. If you don't know what those mean, you can dig up an old Teach Me Omega Sensei back when we had stuff to teach you about. So, Shiro is very focused on swords by way of magic and, replicating them. So, naturally, that meshes very well with Muramasa, the swordsmith. Another theory that is put forward both by Muramasa and actually by Parvati, who is pseudo-studenting Sakura from Fate Stay Night, is that Shiro might be a descendant of Muramasa. That's also a thing that's been bandied around a little. It would probably be thematically appropriate. Obviously, with the school, probably ending up suppressed by the Tokugawa and stuff, they would have had to go into hiding, maybe move way over to Fuyuki City. And for reasons we don't know a lot about Shiro's birth family, he was adopted by the Emiya family. So, it's a little open-ended. That said, access to Shiro's projection, magic, and reality marble enhances Muramasa's own abilities, allowing him to create swords in a flash and a fight for some fun animations, and allows him to use his noble phantasm, the Tsumurikari Muramasa, which compresses all of the infinite blades of Unlimited Blade Works into a single recreation of the Kusanagi sword. And if you don't also get, by the way, that the guy whose name is Emiya in all caps and uses the Unlimited Blade Works is also related to this, I mean, they're not really hiding it, so... Oops. Muramasa's physical appearance is a reference, or the CE was like a beta test, anyway, to Limited Zero Over. It's a craft essence. It's been in since year 1. It is a very relevant flavor text as well, so I assume they were either planning something resembling Muramasa's appearance since the game launched, or just they really wanted to use that cool shot of, slightly older, more powered-up Shiro as like, yeah, we can turn this into a thing. Now, back in some old guidebooks, I think it was around the UBW anime, some interviews and stuff, there are references to Muramasa, still going with the Sengo Muramasa spelling, back in the day regarding to Sasaki Kojiro. It implies that Muramasa may have supplied him, that is the nameless swordsman of him, with his sword, or helped him achieve the Zen state for the Tsubame Gaeshi, or just Nasu was using it as an analogy that, like, Sengo Muramasa in his mind is a guy who could also do crazy sword bullshit, like the Sasaki Kojiro could, which is obviously kind of true. Anyway, there's a few, hints and lines about some other previous through lines, but it's still very basic for it to come back and now be brought up a lot. Now, Muramasa first appears as a major supporting character in Epic of Remnant in the Shimosa chapter. He provides Musashi with his Myojingiri Muramasa, a blade which he made that has the power to cut gods and demons, but because it can't cut fate, he considers it a failure. It is still really good to let arguably alive Musashi defeat the demonic sword masters. But he continues to support the protagonist Musashi throughout that chapter, including, his big boy moment, that if you don't know what that is, I won't ruin it. I'm really hoping and praying that that person yakking about a possible Shimosa anime adaptation online is correct. Love to see some of that work. He also appears much later in Lost Belt 5 Part 2, and technically I think in the stinger for Lost Belt 5 Part 1, but as a character he's in Lost Belt 5 Part 2. Actually, yeah, I think he got a cameo in Astrea's Island. That's the other thing. Anyway, he does show up as an alter ego summoned by the foreign god. We don't really know what's up with him, but we get some teasers, and then in Part 2 he's actually there. He will appear again as a supporting character in the upcoming Lost Belt 6. We're not really going to get into that, but he will be back. Honestly, I suspect the fact that he is going to come up a couple times in core story is why he's not in a lot of other stuff. I can't really track him being like a bonus or getting an extra AP or double XP kind of a thing for any other sort of like side events and stuff. It's all just centered around his appearances in Shimosa or Lost Belt 5 and 6. That means it's time for mechanics. So, in our mechanical section, we know that Muramasa is an SSR Saber, so for that slot he has fairly low attack and fairly high HP, tied with Mordred, funnily enough. He has a very classic Saber, quick arts, buster deck. He has fairly average hit counts and 8 NP gain. Nothing crazy there. And his NP is an AoE arts, which deals defense ignoring damage. It removes enemy offensive buffs, and it gives him 3 turns of NP damage up and 3 turns of arts. That second is based on overcharge first. So obviously this NP is intended to loop and whittle down enemies over time. And indeed, that NP gain is always 10%. So his first skill is similar to a lot of the other Emiya-type characters' projection. It gives him 1 turn of a boost on all 3 card types. These are separate. It's 30 to 50% though, so it's the, Omni-Mana Burst. It also gives him increased Star Absorb for that 1 turn, and is a 5 to 15 Star Bomb. So you get, damage story and also get a big crit opportunity. The second skill is very interesting. It gives you Pierce for 1 turn, so Pierce Invincible, which works against evades. You get 50 to 100% Star Generation up for 1 turn, 50 to 100% critical damage up for 1 turn, and then another 50 to 100% critical damage if the enemy you are critting has an evade or an invincible, which obviously you bypass because you've got piercing. So, very interesting mechanic there to slap enemies. Final skill is also very straightforward. You get a 30 to 50% battery, and also gives him, Muramasa, a 3-turn buff to gain 5 to 10% NP gauge when making attacks. So you get even more charging. It is, by the way, you should note, normal attacks, so it doesn't work on NP that way, though that would be funny, but you don't really need it. He also has a bevy of passives, most of which are pretty unique for a Saber. He has Magic Resistance B, again, pretty common, but he does have Territory Creation A, which, ups his arts damage there, arts effectiveness. He has a unique skill, Appreciation of Swords, to give all allies 5% crit up when he's on the field, so just a little bit extra passive damage for everybody. And another unique passive that gives him 20% trait damage, 20% extra damage, versus enemies with the King trait, which is just permanent and always on him. It's a very interesting style of thing. 20% doesn't usually matter a lot, but it is passive, so it's just, always going to be that extra little chip of damage. And this means that in general, it should be very clear how Muramasa works. He is a farmer. You're going to be using him to clear waves and grind down bosses, and I would put him in my anti-asshole category, similar to, but very distinct from, Ibuki and some other units coming out now and later. So, he has a piercing, and that piercing also means that if those enemies are using those hard defenses that he defeats, he does even more crit damage to them. He ignores death on his NP and has a passive trait damage as well as beefy steroids. 50% up on that 1 turn. He's already got a passive arts up. So, lots of big boy damage, and of course being arts and coming out now at this particular point in the cycle, he very obviously is intended to loop and just keep the pressure on with that NP after NP, giving him the arts effectiveness up for more turns and the NP damage up for more turns, because those are both 3 turns, so it's intended, obviously, you're going to be able to do it back-to-back, or at least within the span of 3 turns. But keep in mind, he has absolutely no defensive abilities whatsoever. He is all about damage output and NP gain. And the offensive buff strip isn't always as useful as, say, a defensive one. It can keep you alive while trying to build up steam and is obviously very useful for certain tricky CQ-type situations, but it won't substitute a proper hard defense. Now, this means, of course, for team support, your obvious pairing here is Castoria, the Arts Loop enabler. She gives Muramasa the hard defenses, the big batteries, not that he necessarily needs that help, and even more damage output to keep Muramasa looping and slaying enemies. Muramasa himself doesn't do any really attack up, but we've got, hard defenses, more attack up, more charge, more NP gain up, more OTS, everything. This also opens up his CE selection a little bit. We'll come back to that. I will say, though, if you're in a fight you hypothetically can't free turn, Castoria is still pretty good for all those reasons, but you can also change it up. You can use units like Tamamo to give him more longevity with healing and stalling, also cycling his skills a little bit. I will at least point out, while Muramasa is very flashy, he has a lot of one-turn buffs for skills, at least for his, biggest damage steroids, and then, the normal 5 to 6 turn cooldown, so obviously you probably don't need all those steroids to do simple farming loops, but if you're trying to actually maximize your damage, you have a very, very short burst window. That said, you can put a bigger tail on that with future support Lady Avalon, coming in a future summer event, to make Muramasa even spicier with the arts crit damage. And then, of course, you can work with agnostic supports like Sima Yi or Waver, or budget supports like, say, Mr. P, Paracelsus. Can be of great use to just keep you getting that loop train and doing that extra bit of damage. Now, speaking of that CE selection, Muramasa has a 50% battery himself. This opens up the classics in that slot. You should all know him by now. Say Golden Sumo 3 times fast, everybody. I hope I get at least one comment that's just Golden Sumo repeated 3 times. But since you'll also probably be pairing him with at least one Castoria, who is herself a 50% battery, you can do some really gnarly stuff. You can throw Black Grail on there to get even more damage. If you don't want to be whittling away at your HP pool because of your limited numbers of defenses, you might try, just the Heaven's Feel CE. Lots of things out there just to maximize your damage. I would say primarily go for arts and NP damage. You can also try and tuck some critical damage in there, but the man already has 200% crit damage if you're trying really good, so you can make that work. Also, note that because, as I said earlier, your Pierce is on a skill and it's only 1 turn, which is a 6-turn cooldown, if you use an Art CE which gives Muramasa piercing or sure hit, that won't necessarily be wasted if you're fighting bosses or other CQ-type stuff where enemies spam hard defenses. You only have 1 turn of piercing, and it's very important, obviously, to maximize your damage, but still, it's just something to keep in mind. Now, Ascension-wise, Muramasa's pretty normal, though he does require some comment shards on his back end, but he's using a lot of older mats that you would probably expect for this kind of servant, so shouldn't be too crazy. Now, his skills start pretty conventional. They're utilizing older mats for most of the time, but they do end on 10 Oni Lanterns each, so watch out for that. That's a relatively new mat with Hienkyo out, though there's been some earlier ones distributed, but yeah, watch out for that if you're trying to go for the big 10s right away. So Muramasa's primary banner will be for what is, for us, New Year's 2023, upcoming banner, happens soon, and he is the Star Servant. They've got him on a separate rate-up as well, even. No rotation. Thank you. And he will return on the normal banners for Road to 7 Lost Belt 6's campaign. I told you he was going to come back for 6. And as a limited SSR, he will be on future Lucky Bag campaigns as well. He will also have a trial quest on his initial banner that can get you a ticket and some other fun testing stuff. Other than that, yeah, I double-checked everything. I don't see him as a future bonus servant or anything. I don't think he's involved in any events. And I think those are his primary rate-ups, at least from checking the wiki and stuff. So, a relatively rare servant. Keep your eye out for him. And I hope I've imparted to you how much I love swords in this video. And I hope that on this banner together, we shall enjoy swords as well. Also, I wrote this script on my birthday. Go me. It's not my birthday anymore, but that's when I wrote it. Anyway, hope everybody had a happy holidays. Best wishes for 2023. And I now have to get used to saying it that way. Thanks. But that'll be all, folks. Big reminder to give this video a like if you're liking it. Leave a comment down below on how you're doing on them banners. Remember, the catalyst is secured. Guaranteed TM. You can also join our Discord and post in our role thread there. Link is in the video description and channel page. Please subscribe to the channel to get more Wanteds and more of our weekly podcast, Let's Talk FGO. I believe with the way banners are, this video should be coming out the same day as the Let's Talk, because there's no maintenance and stuff. It's a little weird. But yeah, so check that out as well. Sub, make sure you're on there. Ring that bell for notifications so you know when we be posting a video. And also, like I said at the front of the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. Get access to this video early. Get access to audio releases early. All kinds of other fun stuff. Check it out. Really support us. You can support us annually. Our minimum tier is $1 a month or about $10 a year because there is a slight discount on annual memberships, and it's about to be a new year, so it's a great time to lock in your support of Studio Omega for a whole year. Well, I'll get out of your hair and wish you guys happy rolling. See you on the flip side, everybody.